Alive.
Must have ran into something, got stunned or something.
In the window.
Oh,
When I left the church, I drove around this, there were little gray feathers.
Maybe you're driving that bird around the camp.
All right, there we are. Well, let's start with our opening prayer. Oh Lord, get it on screen and pray.
O Lord, ever living, ever loving creator of all, we bring to you our experiences, our traditions, our culture, and our beliefs. We ask you to transform them and us with your wisdom, to be perfect instruments of love and action in your will. We ask this through Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit. Amen.
So like we were just talking about music, and Lisa taught us a great class last week. As I was preparing for this, I read some interesting things that I hadn't included before. I just thought I'd throw that in there before we start the next topic. So the Gloria that we sing, it goes back to 2nd century. Pope Telesphorus in 126 through 139 is when he was Pope, mandated the use of it in the Christmas Eve service. So the Gloria has been with us almost from the beginning of Christianity.
Wow.
By the 4th century, it was known throughout the entire Christian world, so it took a few centuries to spread. Initially only sung by the Pope at the Christmas Mass.
Wow.
By the 7th century, priests would be singing it, but only at Easter. And then by the 11th century, sung at every Mass by the celebrant. So it just, I thought that was cool as well. It's been with us right from the beginning. You know? So in our moving forward in the order of the liturgy, the next thing is the Nicene Creed. So, excuse me, I edited my notes yesterday and all my edits are missing. So,
You're in your brain.
yeah, right. Well, so the Nicene Creed first was began to be used in liturgy in the Eastern Church in 476, introduced by Patriarch Timothy in Constantinople. So what's that, about 150 years after the Nicene Creed was written, roughly. And then it spread from the East throughout the rest of Christianity.
It was a mutually agreed upon. I don't know the word.
Creed, yes. Well, and we're going to talk about how the Creed got started here. It's kind of an interesting story. So the Nicene Creed was actually, the final form was finalized in the Second Ecumenical Council. The Second Ecumenical Council is known as the First Council of Constantinople, 381. So the Nicene Council was 325, and so roughly 60 years later, almost, it was finalized. And the final part is just a few phrases on the end.
Those people that gathered, they were all of the same religion, or were there different?
Oh yeah, no, they were all
Christian
Christians.
sects?
Yeah, they were all Christians. And keep in mind, back then there was one Christian church. There was no denominations. You know,
Yeah.
Even the East and the West had not split yet, and it was mostly Middle East and Europe and Africa. You know, it hadn't spread too far elsewhere. There was some in Asia. So the First Ecumenical Council, which was the Council of Nicaea, occurred in 325. And it's where they formed the Nicene Creed and a lot of other decisions. It convened on May 20th and July 25th, so it was a couple months long. The Nicene Council, the Council of Nicaea, was called by Emperor Constantine I. He's the one, of course, who legalized Christianity in Rome. He himself, at that point, was an unbaptized catechumen. So he was studying to become a Christian.
It was his mother, wasn't it? Was she the big influencer?
Yes, you know, you're correct. You're correct. He presided over the opening session, took part in the discussions. About 300 bishops attended from every region of the empire except for Britain. Britain was invited, but they couldn't. We were too poor, couldn't afford to go there. And actually, Rome offered Britain money to pay for their trip, and they didn't want to take it because they didn't want to be obligated to vote in favor of anything Rome had to say.
Truth.
Right? Yeah. Because already at that point there was, some tension between regions, East versus West, and Britain was like, well, we're not going to be financially obligated to vote one way or another, so we're not going.
Was there anything particular that they were against, or
Not that I know of.
just in general?
It's just by principle. Also, the Pope did not attend, but he sent legates to represent himself. Not everybody who invited was able to. Also, St. Nicholas was there. There's the famous story, I'm sure you all know, about St. Nicholas punching Arius.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
That was the first Christmas then?
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a legend. So Arius is the guy who formed this controversy, which we're going to talk about in just a second. He was ultimately found to be a heretic, and he said Jesus was not truly God, and it made St. Nicholas angry, and he punched him in the nose.
Whoa.
Well, there was a tension between the humanists and the other branch, and maybe Arius was part of the humanist
Oh yeah.
wing.
So anyway, so Nicholas spent a couple days in jail, and
It's a great Christmas story.
yeah,
Tell your children,
Yeah.
grandchildren.
there was a risk of being defrocked, but somehow he managed not to be defrocked. These priests are not supposed to punch people. So the big thing, of course, was the Nicene Creed, but just to let you know, other things were discussed at this council too, as well.
Isn't that where they established the books of the Bible and such?
Not yet,
Oh, not yet?
but there was be coming along soon after that. They did settle on determining Easter as the first full moon in spring after the spring equinox, so that's a handy tool to confuse you on when Easter happens.
That's why it floats.
Yeah. And they talked about the proper method of consecrating bishops. They condemned lending money for interest by ordained people. And they refused to allow bishops, priests, and deacons to move from one church to another at that point in time. They confirmed the primacy of Alexandria and Jerusalem as prime churches in their areas. There's a historian named Socrates Scholasticus, a great name.
Starship.
Yeah.
Going back to the Alexandria and Jerusalem, so Alexandria was a big city in regards to the creation of the
Well,
religion.
so in back in the ancient church, you have a region. It basically is kind of like saying the head church of the diocese kind of thing. Like we're saying this is in this region of the world, Alexandria or Jerusalem in Israel and Judah will be the prime church in that area.
Where is Alexandria? I'm not really sure.
That's in Egypt.
Yes.
On the mountain
Right.
at the opening of the
I was
Nile.
going to guess that.
Yeah. So that they formally recognize, okay, in Egypt, Alexandria, the Church of Alexandria is the main church. So it's not unlike us today having a diocese and having a main church it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, this was Alexandria, Egypt,
Correct. Yes.
and that was the location of the great library, which was
Right. Yes.
backed at some point in history, but it was clearly a place of great learning.
Like Thessaloniki.
Which is probably why they chose that to be the prime church of Egypt.
Yeah,
Wonder what the late keys were.
You're pretty exorbitant at this point if you still had a book out.
Yeah. Well, they have one of their books.
And so this 5th century Byzantine historian Socrates Scholasticus
Well, this is interesting.
said that they were also trying to talk about enforcing celibacy, but it didn't. That particular debate did not succeed.
What
So
was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah.
Love. That's
What was the
focusing
reason
their attention.
behind their wanting to have priests
Yeah,
celebrate?
well, I guess so you're not
Distracted?
divided, not distracted. You're only devoted to the church.
Women are distracting.
So they,
So it really went back and forth. Over the
It did,
centuries.
yeah, it went back and forth, and actually, I don't think it was formally confirmed till the 11th century.
because a lot of these early popes were married.
Yeah, oh, sure.
Popettes.
So this is where Nicaea is. It's currently in Turkey. At that point, it would have been Constantinople, or not, well, Istanbul would have been Constantinople, but it was the Byzantine Empire, or actually just Rome.
Yeah, it wasn't Byzantine.
Yeah, Byzantine is a later understanding. They never called themselves Byzantine, actually. There's a historian looking back calling it that. They just called themselves Rome, and this was New Rome. And then eventually Rome split, of course, into the East and West, and the West died before the East did.
It's interesting that that area was the center of Christianity at that time.
Yes,
Now Turkey certainly is a Muslim country.
yes.
Wonder what that,
Well, Crusades did away with the Christians.
you think that's what switched, for lack of a better word?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When they,
Hey, Robin
when they
Jennings.
sacked Constantinople and changed the name to Istanbul. So the big debate and the big reason for the council happening and the Nicene Creed being written was because of Arius. Arius was a priest who was born around 250 in Libya. He died in Constantinople in 336.
Wait a minute, that makes him what, 100?
No, 86.
No, that's more.
He was a priest in Alexandria. And what he said was, the Son of God is not co-eternal with God the Father. It's distinct from the Father and therefore subordinate to him.
So this is the,
This is Father Arius at that time teaching this.
this is not the heretic of whom we were speaking. right?
Yes, well, he is a heretic.
Okay.
He was his teaching, this teaching itself was found to be heretical, and he was excommunicated from the church in the end.
Well, since everybody else was thinking the other way, it's sort of interesting why he would go that direction. Wonder what made him think that.
Well, there were other similar ideas in the past, and actually he was once earlier excommunicated. There was a very similar idea. It was almost the same idea. It had a different name besides. He adapted that idea that he picked up from somebody else and twisted it around a little bit. And actually, he was already once before excommunicated, but let back into the church. And then he adapted this teaching and became known as the Arius doctrine. Arianism was his teaching that Jesus was not God the Father. I mean, it's similar to what the Jehovah's Witnesses teach today too.
Well, it's probably the church resisted that because that would diminish Christ
Yes.
and diminish Christianity and make it just ordinary, I guess.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
that's probably why they had the resistance to
Right. Yeah.
that kind of heretic.
So the big church thought there should not be a pecking order, and he did.
Right.
And that's,
Yes. Yeah. Right.
You can seem to catch things in a nutshell.
I'll tell you what, it's my Henley background.
Yeah, certainly it would diminish Christ.
Yeah.
And also the majority of Christianity did not agree with it. So that's part of it too.
Did he pay a price for that? Was he
Well, he was-
excommunicated or burned?
Again?
He was not killed, but he ultimately was excommunicated and exiled in the end. But it took years for all that to happen. But at one point in time, his teachings were gaining some support in various areas, and that was part of the problem. The church sees this idea of gaining traction that majority of the church is opposed to. So bishop, and this is confusing, the bishop of Alexander was named Alexander. sometimes people, the names that we apply historically actually are not really their names, like Julian of Norwich. Her name was not Julian, but she was attached to this church of. So I'm not sure if the Bishop of Alexander was really named Alexander, but all the textbooks refer to the Bishop of Alexander at that time, of Alexandria, as Bishop Alexander. So, and it's a little confusing because it's Alexandria and it's Bishop Alexander, but
It was probably George.
yeah, it could have been, The Bishop Alexander called 2 separate meetings for his priests to decide what to do about Arianism that was gaining traction and causing disruption. They could not gain a consensus. And then meanwhile, Arius' reputations continue to grow. He's continued to find adherents. People
Was
who
he
follow
out
him.
proselytizing for his viewpoint?
Yes, he was. Yeah. He got excited about this idea. Like I said, he picked up a similar idea for somewhere else and developed it on his own. Now he's all excited about it. And so 5 years before the Council of Nicaea, in 320 AD, Bishop Alexander called a larger meeting because these other meetings he called didn't accomplish anything. This one included the entire church of Alexandria and neighboring church of Marotis. So they got together in a big meeting and included 80 church leaders, including Athanasius, who's also historically significant in this area, and later would succeed Alexander as bishop. They signed a document at that point declaring Arianism as heretical. So they said, Arian's a heretic. He's got to stop teaching this. You're no longer allowed to teach this teaching. And so he went somewhere else and continued to teach. He didn't follow their orders. He went to other parts of the Middle East, gained more followers. A couple of bishops joined in with him and decided, yeah, this sounds like a reasonable theology. So he, in spite of him being condemned as a heretic, he continued to teach and gain followers. So this problem was growing and really, developing to the point where it's going to even cause a fracture and a split in the church. So 321, Bishop Alexander called another council. This time more than 100 church leaders showed up. Arius argued his viewpoints to the people and adding more blatantly, instead of just sort of hinting at it, that the Son was not of the same essence with the Father. The council was really just actually floored by his strong words. Father Michael.
Hey, it's great to see you guys. How
You
you
too.
doing?
Good.
Sorry, not joining you this morning, but this is our guest preacher today,
Oh.
Robin Jennings.
Hello.
And so-
I hear he's a really nice guy.
Jennifer, I know, it's so good to see you. Buddy.
We're touring around. We've been
Cool.
through the new building, and so now it's the Lyman House tour.
All right.
Show him the vault where we keep all the church treasure.
Uh-huh. I'd have to talk to Peter about that.
Congratulations.
It is good. Hey,
Yeah.
hey, Robin, the new rector at St. Francis, was he already on board or is he coming from the outside?
He came from Nashville,
From Nashville?
but I was saying to Michael, he came about 2 years ago and was here for 2 weeks and then COVID hit.
Oh,
That was his honeymoon,
yeah,
2 years of this stuff,
that's good.
or
Well,
whatever it's been, So,
that's good. It must be a nice fellow.
oh, he's a great guy. I mean, but can you imagine? Welcome to St. Francis and.
Is it something I said?
Yeah.
St. Francis is still a good place to get married, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Very good.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. That was my church. We got married there.
Oh, did you? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
You want to hear our wedding vows? We can.
It's a special place in our hearts.
Yeah, I bet. Well, cool. I'm glad he's here to preach. So anyway, so the council excommunicated Arius for a second time. So he's excommunicated again.
What's the difference between a council and a synod or however you pronounce it?
A synod means it's a collection of people meeting together. I mean, it's pretty similar. I think a council is a larger thing, more people involved, and there's more purposeful things that they're addressing. The idea behind when you say ecumenical council, you're implying the there are representatives from all of Christianity there, which is why there's been no true ecumenical councils since the East and the West split, because they just,
We can't get together.
yeah. And of course, after that, we had the Reformation with more splits. And so you can't really truly have an ecumenical council anymore, not by definition. So anyway, so he was excommunicated, and Arius went to Palestine to continue teaching after his excommunication. And so you see how this thing is developing over the course of a number of years. So all this stuff is what led up to the first ecumenical council, which was a big deal.
So he was excommunicated. That didn't
Twice.
change his views at all.
He was excommunicated twice and told to stop teaching multiple times, and he
Never
just
did.
no, he would just go somewhere else and continue teaching. You know,
He had a mission. didn't
he did. He believed in what he was teaching. And there was some violence starting to happen by the Arians. So this is getting really out of hand. And Alexander, Bishop of Alexandria, wrote to all the bishops giving his account of Arianism and why it's wrong, just trying to pull everybody in and into the debate, seeing why there are problems with that theology. So remember, he's been excommunicated twice now. There's another council by Eusebius of Nicomedia, held another council separately to look at Arius and his actions. And they decided Arius is okay, and they readmitted him to the church. So he's been excommunicated twice already, and now readmitted to the church again.
Well, how did they have the authority to do that?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't think it was universally agreed upon. This one, the council said, hey, okay, we're going to let you back in, but I don't think that was a universal, unanimous decision. Which is why there's going to be more councils. The story's not. This just keeps. It's a really bad soap opera.
Yeah, it's kind of it sets a bad precedence for Christianity.
Right? Yeah.
You know, getting along.
Yeah, we've been doing that for our entire history, right?
That's
Love the
everybody. So
excommunicator.
everybody.
So Alexander wrote a statement of faith and got more than 250 church leaders to sign it. So this thing is continuing to snowball, which got Constantine involved. So all the snowballing is causing a lot of disruption. You know, Christianity was just legalized about 10, 15 years ago. And now this is all going on. Constantine's probably having some second thoughts about whether he should have done that or not, right?
Yeah, that's-
And he's seeing this disruption to his kingdom or his empire. And a lot of his motivation was political more than theological. But he's seeing all this snowballing, all this tension and infighting, and saying, hey, we've got to stop. We got to knock this off. Wrote a letter to Alexander and Arius saying, could everybody just get along and find some resolution? Yeah, right, basically. But Alexander summoned another council, and they agreed with his statement and said, Arius is still excommunicated. That readmission into the church is invalid because it was not ecumenical enough. There are not enough people involved in it. One little group didn't have the authority to do that. So Arius is mad about that, goes directly to Constantine. And Constantine invited Arius to make his case in front of the entire church in the city of Nicaea. And that's how the Nicene Council was born. All this controversy, all this soap opera happening, people infighting, bad theology is gaining traction, but the majority of the church doesn't agree. And Constantine says, I can't have this going on in my empire. Let's all meet. Let's have representatives from every part of the Christianity come in and make an absolute definitive decision. Creating, of course, the first ecumenical council of the Christian church, of which there have been several after that.
This is the first.
This is the very first. It
And
is
that year was
325.
325.
You know, shortly after it become legal. It wouldn't have been possible much before that because it was illegal in the Roman Empire. You know, how are you going to form a council of this magnitude in an illegal church?
Yeah. You'd all be sort of in trouble.
Yeah, well, it'd be an easy way to execute a bunch of Christians, right?
Exactly.
And so Constantine wasn't necessarily interested in the priests and bishops were all interested in theology. And Constantine might have been to some extent, but I think he's more concerned about stability of his empire.
Constantine ruled from Istanbul or Constantinople.
Yes.
And so what happened to Rome? I mean,
That's a great.
from a Roman Empire, did they move all the administrative? all that stuff?
Constantine did move the capital to Constantinople. Yeah, which was really weird because it was still the Roman Empire.
Yeah. But the church, the Pope was in Rome.
Yes.
Right? So the religious center was still
Correct.
Rome, but the Roman,
Yes, and you know, after the Eastern and Western Church split, Constantinople became
yeah,
the Eastern Orthodox's version of Rome. That was their main.
So did they move back? Did the Roman Empire move back to Rome, or
No, because you know what happened?
or it started?
They
to
gradually
decline?
split into East and West over the course of the centuries. Rome still had a lot of administrative and legal activity going on. It was like a secondary capital. But, you know, East and West, politically and religiously, continued to gradually drift apart to the point where it officially was all the Roman Empire. But when the Muslims were sacking Constantinople, they wrote to Rome asking for help. They're like, you know,
They didn't provide it.
this is supposed to be the same empire. How are you not sending help? You know, but theoretically it's the same, but in function, it was really two different kingdoms.
Yeah.
And at that point in history, Constantinople was much stronger. Rome fell before, you know, centuries before Constantinople did, which is where historians refer to them as the Byzantine Empire. Because Rome fell and fell apart. And, you know, like around what, 450 AD or something like that. But Constantinople continued on for another 1,000 years. It was like in the 1400s before it fell. So when was the end of the Roman Empire? Depends how you look at it. You know, there's a 1,000-year gap between Eastern and Western Roman Empire.
So what did the people after Rome fell and East Constantinople became the Byzantine? Now you said a historian named the Byzantine,
Yeah.
but what did the people call it? I mean,
They
it's
thought of
still
themselves as the Roman
Eastern-
Empire.
Still Roman Empire,
Yeah.
but
Even though Rome was not part of it.
yeah,
You know, it's like when we talk about the Holy Roman Empire, which was a couple centuries later, when Europe was trying to recreate it. In the end, Rome was not part of that either. People like, you know, back then, people like to claim the name of Rome because of the glory days of Rome. You know, it had power in the name. So Constantine invited every Christian bishop to attend the council. At that time, there were about 1,800 bishops in the Roman Empire. And they
People
couldn't.
just sort of declare themselves a bishop. They weren't appointed by Pope or central.
No, they were kind of the same way now as bishops. They come from, you know, you have to be a priest first.
Right.
The local community, our diocese as a head church, right? And
Right.
we want somebody to be the bishop to be partly administrative and partly spiritual leader of
so
this community.
they elect or choose
Yeah,
their own. And then,
right, exactly.
Gotcha.
Locally voted on from various priests. I think this priest is a good leader. I'm voting for him. So, you know, there's various debates on how many people attended, but most historians accept Athanasius's account. There were 318 bishops present at the Nicene Council. But that's the bishop count. Not everybody who attended the council was a bishop. Council also allowed each bishop to bring 2 priests and 3 deacons. So in the end, we don't know exactly how many church leaders were there. We think there were 318 bishops, but there could have been almost approaching 2,000 church leaders there at this council. When you add in all the priests and deacons, that would have also been included in voting and decision-making and debate. So close to 2,000 people there debating this whole, and earlier we read that list of other things that were discussed, but the main thing was Arianism. What are we going to do about this Arianism, the idea of Arianism, that Jesus was not God, co-eternal with the Father. And what are we going to do about Arian creating all this disruption? That was absolutely the main focus of the Nicene Council. That's why it was called together. So after Alexander and Arius, they both made their case to the church, and both made presentations. And after all this debate and discussion, that was the end of Arianism. There was a final nail in the coffin saying this is not going to be taught in the Christian church. All the bishops except for 2 signed the creed, the Nicene Creed. Those 2 bishops were excommunicated and exiled to Illyria. And Constantine did warn people at this point. He said, everybody's going to sign this document or be exiled from the Roman Empire. The interesting significance of history of this too, the Nicene Council, one thing is like, it is the first truly ecumenical council where representatives from the entire Christianity gets together to discuss issues. The downside is it also was the beginning of really truly institutionalized Christianity as a formal state function. I mean, here's the emperor declaring this council, and the emperor saying, you either sign this or you be excommunicated or exiled. When you start combining church and state, there's all kinds of potential power abuses going on. So that's the downside to this. So there's an upside and a downside to the Nicene Council. Put an end to Arianism once and for all. Emperor Constantine ordered that all of Arius' works be burned. So any writings that he did are no longer in existence.
He was also, snuck and looked at my Google, he was poisoned. Do we know who did that?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Arius was?
Yes.
Oh,
That's what it said in Google.
well, I didn't know that. That's interesting. I know he lived for a long time. He was exiled.
They got to.
Yep. So with the creation of the Nicene Creed, there was a precedent set to establish more ecumenical councils of bishops and create more statements of belief and canons of doctrine of orthodoxy. So theologically, it was a good thing for the most part, except for the whole thing of combining church and state. So we've got the Nicene Creed, and I'm going to go through the lines of it and show why those lines were created.
It's probably.
I know, you're exactly right. And I was about to say, it's time to close. You're absolutely, no, thank you. I appreciate you keeping an eye on
It's
it.
a good point to break, so we can
Yes.
pick this up in detail next time.
Absolutely. So that's what we'll do next time. Oh, sure.
It's fascinating.